التصدي لها؟ وماذا يعني استخدام اللغة لتهيئة أرض المعركة؟ وما هو الرد الفعال على المؤسسات العاملة تحت شعار منظمات حقوق الإنسان والتي هي جزء من هذه المعركة؟ الحرب الناعمة من الداخل. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا. حرب جديدة تنتهجها أطراف ودول مختلفة في المنطقة، إنها الحرب الناعمة أو حرب المعلومات. هي إجراء ضمني يتشكل من العمليات السياسية والثقافية والاستخباراتية التي تنتهجها دولة ما أو جماعة ما للتأثير على الجو العام وعلى المواطنين والقيام بالتغييرات المتوخاة في البلد الهدف. إذن من بين الخصائص المميزة للنزاعات الحالية والحروب المستقبلية الانقسام بين أسياد المعلومات وضحايا المعلومات، ومن هنا التركيز على الأجساد المشوهة والنساء الثكالى والكثير من جرعات الدم. والله حرام، والله حرام. هذا النوع من الحرب يشدد على ضرورة النظر إلى الصراع بأقصى درجات البساطة الأخلاقية، بساطة تقوم على فكرة الضحايا والمعتدي مما يتطلب إسقاط المعتدي. إذن هوليوود تحضر ميدان المعركة، وحرب المعلومات هذه كما يرى ضابط أمريكي عين نائباً لرئيس الأركان لدى المخابرات والمكلف بتعريف مستقبل الحرب في مجلة US Army War College Quarterly في عام 97. هذه الحرب لن تكون مرتكزة على المنطق الجيوسياسي، بل سيتم إنشاؤها مثل أي دراما هوليوودية من العواطف الجياشة، مشاعر الكراهية والغيرة والجشع، بدلا من الاستراتيجية هي التي ستحدد ظروف نزاعات حرب المعلومات، وسنكتب سيناريوهات وننتجها ونجمع أرباحنا. إن إبداعنا لا حدود له، يخلص الضابط الأمريكي. الباحثة منسقة الأنشطة في منتدى النزاعات أشلينغ بيرن تطلعنا على اللغة المستخدمة لتحضير ميدان المعركة وما يعني ذلك، وكيفية الحماية من حرب المعلومات والتصدي لها، وما هو الرد الفاعل على منظمات حقوق الإنسان المنخرطة في حرب المعلومات. Ashling Byrne, researcher and project coordinator at Conflicts Forum. Welcome to the Inside.
Thank you.
Actually, as we've been talking about this issue, that there is something of a new kind of war, which is the soft war or the information war. What is the nature of this information warfare?
I think the nature of this information war is it's almost more important now than the sort of big military invasions we've seen of Afghanistan, of Iraq. And what we're seeing now is much more, particularly in Syria. I'll start by saying something about in 1997, the deputy head of US intelligence wrote in the US Army War College Journal, and he said, we're seeing a new kind of war now, and this is an information war. And he said, we write the script, we control the players, and he said societies who don't have the capacity just won't be able to keep up with what we're doing. And I think particularly in Syria, this is what we've seen. But if you look back at Iraq, at Afghanistan, the US was spending by 2011 something like nearly $600 million only on information operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think it's important to look back what they did in Iraq and Afghanistan to see how things have now developed in Syria.
Is it that effective, such kind of warfare?
So I'll give two examples from Afghanistan. One was we know this from WikiLeaks, and USA Today did a big study on this, that the Americans were producing 11 hours of radio and television programs a day in said by Afghans themselves. They said, because we're not Muslim, we'd be American, people wouldn't believe us, they don't trust us, it's important that it's
So they used the indigenous people to help them deliver their message.
They used indigenous people and they used NGOs, and we'll come to this later on Syria, but this is how this warfare is done. So information war is very much part of the sort of modern warfare. And we see this particularly in Syria, and in another study that Time magazine did, where they showed the cyber warriors, they called them, who've been trained by the US in Syria, but also wider, and it's all targeting countries where there's a strategic conflict with the US.
This type of war, I believe, has also been used in Iran too, but we're going to get back to this issue. But I want you to tell me, how does this relate to counterinsurgency, or what they refer to in the term of coin?
Okay, it links to what I was saying, that very much the key component of COIN is winning hearts and minds and trying to find out who are the insurgents. And I think if the history of COIN is very interesting, that it first sort of was used in Vietnam, and it led to terrible results. You know, inevitably what was apparent was that torture and murder are a key component of COIN, of counterinsurgency. Because in order to get information of who are the insurgents at the village level, at the town level, there has to be either incentive. So in Vietnam, for example, the Americans gave money, $30 for an official, $40 for a district official, for example, who were killed by insurgents. But it's about trying to turn the population, turn key people in the population to your side, so you can then use them to implement.
So you can win the hearts and minds.
You win the hearts and minds, and they effectively become a proxy source, and a proxy force, who are then used in warfare. And we saw this very much in Iraq. And if you look at Bob Woodward, the very eminent US journalist, he did a study of the surge in Iraq. And he found that very similar issues of torture, murder, inevitably were part of what happened in Iraq. I think it was McChrystal's deputy said that one of the US operation command groups was effectively a killing machine. They just got out of control, and both them and the Iraqi forces they had trained were just killing, murdering, torturing people.
So we've seen that this information war is at the heart, and it gained centrality in the coin, or at the heart of the method used or followed by the US forces. Now, how has this information warfare been used in the case of Syria?
I think in the case of Syria, probably it's the best example of how the information war is actually much more important than a normal battle, a sort of invasion. There's no invasion, there's no occupation, there's no intervention as yet, as we saw in Libya. But from the start, the US have admitted, Time magazine have exposed that from the start, the US were training activists who they called cyber warriors. This is done through NGOs, so Freedom House, the Institute for War and Peace Reporting. This is why some NGOs have a very dubious sort of role to play in conflicts like the conflict in Syria. And what they did is they trained thousands of cyber activists to produce false videos. That very much, not all false videos, but very much the aim was to create a narrative, so that in the West this would create a kind of consciousness that would facilitate regime change. Whether there would be foreign direct intervention, or as we're seeing in Syria, that this is basically a proxy war. So the US, Britain, France, with their Gulf allies, are arming and funding and assisting with communications equipment the Free Syria Army and various other groups in Syria, including jihadist groups. And the whole aim is with the aim of overthrowing the government. It's been a rocky road in Syria, and a lot of the military tactics haven't worked. But at every stage, if you see the siege on Homs.
But you know, it's not enough as a warfare. It has to go hand in hand with the military tactics.
It goes hand in hand, and I think what you see, that's why what's interesting from the US Army documents and a lot of interviews that have been done, for example, from Iraq, and what General McChrystal was doing, that this in many cases the information war is actually more important. It plays more of a much more important role than the actual military.
Or intelligence, perhaps.
And intelligence, and that's why you see in Syria, you know, in the wake of the killing of the US ambassador in Libya, the US have admitted that actually all of their best CIA officers were removed from Libya quite quickly, and they've all been based in the south of Turkey. Mm-hmm. So this is a very much intelligence information initiative with, there aren't American boots on the ground. As McCain has said, you know, we can do this without having American boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. We can use, you know, the proxy forces in Syria, for example, the FSA, to do what Brookings called the dirty work, basically killings and attacks on the Syrian government.
Right. How dangerous, Aisling, is such kind of warfare? I mean, is it winning in Syria the way it lost in Iran?
I think it's, in Syria, I would say they have won, and I think that's probably why President Assad said, you know, we can't win against this kind of media onslaught. I think Syria realized that it's just impossible to win. As the general who wrote in the US Army War College Journal wrote, you know, societies who can't keep up, they'll lose the war. And various commentaries have said that although Assad is winning the war on the ground and crushing forces and really defeating the insurgents, he's not winning the information war. And it's very difficult, you know, if you're up against this barrage of activists, you know, thousands of videos uploaded daily, well-trained activists who are given very high-tech, you know, communications equipment, internet in a box. There's now a project funded by the US government to give internet in a box. They train activists how to avoid being monitored by the Syrian security forces. Interestingly, the software comes from software that was developed by the US government to use it against drug traffickers and internet hackers. Mm-hmm. And they're now reusing that software in these cases, like in the case of Syria. And they're specifically giving money to fund research of how this can be used. I think it's the New America Foundation, which is a very prestigious American think tank, has a grant from the US State Department to actually look at this internet in a box to facilitate you know, this kind of immediate, being able to upload immediately onto Skype, onto YouTube, videos that portray this narrative, which is essentially that, you know, unarmed civilians are being killed by the Syrian security forces.
Why do you think that Assad is losing in face of such kind of a war?
Okay, I think President Assad and Syria is losing the information war because it's almost impossible to counter and to keep up with this kind of barrage of information. And you need to look at the players. There are not only the cyber warriors, as Time called them, there are foreign embedded journalists, and as the US Army learnt in Fallujah, and they said themselves, as we know through WikiLeaks, that these embedded journalists act effectively as the propaganda arm of the US Army. Mm-hmm. So we have, you know, by far the majority of Western journalists going into Syria are embedded effectively with the insurgents.
Can you give us an example on how?
Well, one example of this is Alex Thompson from Channel 4, who actually, and Channel 4's coverage in Britain, Channel 4 is one of the main British television channels. Channel 4's coverage takes almost 100% an anti-Assad government line. And they frame, as with most of the media in Britain, they frame the conflict in terms of, you know, unarmed civilians who were eventually forced to take up weapons to fight against the sort of brutality of the Syrian security forces. Mm-hmm. And it was only when Alex Thompson, and there were many Channel 4 journalists who were embedded with the Free Syria Army and with other insurgent groups. Mm-hmm. And it was only when Alex Thompson realized he had a very near miss. He was intentionally set up when he was just, I think it was outside Homs, by the insurgents to go and be effectively killed by the Syrian government forces. And he realized it was a trap, and they made a lucky escape. And it was only after that that he said publicly, you know, I know this was a trap, because a dead journalist killed by the Syrian government would look terrible in the West. Mm-hmm. And it fits the narrative that Assad's forces
so you
are
can
not
win
only
again the hearts and minds of the people.
And winning the hearts and minds of people in the West. The aim being to try to create this sort of consciousness that will facilitate regime change, President Assad and his government have been completely demonized in the West. You know, he's shown in cartoons bathing in children's blood, and all this is part of this demonization of the government.
Aisling, we'll talk more about how to protect